Every single time I went into the store, the ajushi owner would physically grab my hand in order to tell me off about my tattoos. Hi guys, this is Rose and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be telling you all of the weird things about living in Korea. And some of these things are going to be generalizations, obviously. This is not every single Korean does every single one of these things, but this is just like my experience of Korean culture and my experience of Korean people. So now this is one of the weirdest things that you start doing when you live in Korea for any period of time, and that is you will start incessantly bowing all the time. This is something I never did before living in Korea, but now I do it all the time and I can't stop. So in Korea, it's totally normal to bow a lot of the time. Not like a full bow, but just like a little half bow, even a nod of the head. That's pretty common and you do it in a lot of situations. Like when you enter a shop, when you leave a shop, when somebody gives you something, or when somebody who you don't know speaks to you, you tend to do a little bow. All the bowing, all the time. And it just becomes such a habit because you're doing it all the time that it is really, really hard to stop. I think also because I've worked in China, and so it's double drummed into me. I don't really know why. That's gonna be my excuse. And you look really dumb when you do it in Western society. Even shops in London I'll bow and people give you kind of a weird look, why are you bowing? That's not a normal thing to do. But when you're actually in Korea, you know who this really works for? Socially awkward people, like me. No eye contact, a predetermined way of entering any situation politely. It's genius. I love it. But it's kind of weird when you come back to the UK and it's not socially normal and you look kind of weird, but still, I love it. Another thing that's super weird is when you first get to South Korea, you will start eating at very, very weird times. Your whole meal structure will completely twist on its head. Now, I very much like a routine. I have a very specific bedtime routine, and if I don't do that, I have nightmares due to unresolved previous traumas, childhood trauma, latent self-hatred, all of those fun things. Forget about all of those routines when you move to Korea. Koreans eat very, very late at night. They finish work really late, they start dinner really late. It's just a part of Korean society. And I really found especially when you first arrive somewhere, you're so desperate to make friends. Somebody calls you up at 9:30, 10 to say, hey, come for dinner, we're going for dinner. You're gonna be yes, friends, human contact. 9 p.m, there, 10 p.m, I'm with you. 11 p.m, no way. I don't care how lonely I am, I'm already in bed with sheet mask on and Grey's Anatomy, and you're not getting me out of bed for anything. Except maybe a double cheeseburger from Shake Shack, because they're really good. And I'm really hungry. And to be honest with you, late night culture in general is something that you should definitely be ready for if you're planning on moving to South Korea. There are 24-hour cafes, people don't even get to the club until gone 11 p.m. It's just a late night culture. And if you want to make friends, if you want to have the full experience, then you gotta embrace that part of Korean culture too. Another super weird thing is that you'll start drinking 2 or 3 times more coffee than you've ever drunk in your entire life. It's kind of a religion insult. So before we go any further, full disclosure, I do not actually drink coffee. Even though I work in the entertainment industry that basically runs on coffee, I don't drink it. It was this really weird thing, when I first started out in my career, people, I didn't drink coffee and people were oh, well, you just wait 2 weeks into the industry, 2 weeks into your first job, you'll start drinking coffee. And so me being my stubborn self was just I will never drink coffee. I will never be a slave to the caffeine bean. Caffeine bean? Coffee bean. Caffeine. Coffee beans. Anyway, I was just really stubborn and I just never got into it. However, within less than 24 hours of stepping off that plane in Seoul, I had already tried my first caffeinated drink that wasn't tea. I was so strong and then I was so weak. And there's actually a little bit of a funny story as to how I tried this first taste of coffee. Now, my Korean is not superb. And it was even worse when I first got to Seoul. And I get very anxious when I speak Korean. I get a lot of stage fright. So on my first full day, I tried to order a hot chocolate when I thought I was ordering a hot chocolate, and ended up with this green frothy concoction that was definitely not hot chocolate. Anyway, I drank it because I'm British and I was scared that I would be too impolite if I didn't drink it. So I did. And then the next time I went to the cafe, this was like the cafe right next door to my apartment. So I went there the next day and it was the same barista who served me that first time. And he like very enthusiastically said like in English, same. And he was obviously very, very proud of his English. And to be fair, his English was way better than my Korean at the time, by a long way. So, and I really didn't want to let him down. And I was still like getting used to the city and I was a bit jet lagged. So I was just like, and I really wanted a hot chocolate, but like, I just said yes because I didn't really know what else to say. I panicked. Anyway, he got me this like green frothy drink and I continued to have that until I stopped going to that cafe, which is like the world's most pathetic story in the entire world. When people say the British are polite to a fault, this is what we mean. So that's the enthralling tale of my first matcha latte. How exciting. But for real, Koreans spend a lot of time in cafes and you'll end up doing that too if you live in Korea. It's a place to study, to have meetings, to hang out with your friends. A lot of people still live with their parents and like chilling at home like with friends is like not really that common a thing. People much prefer to go to cafes. So it's like a very sociable thing, like much more so in South Korea than in any other country I've ever lived in. Another thing that's like always been super weird to me is that cafes have to work so hard to stand out. Like in the West, like cafes will put in like some sort of effort mostly to just like make the atmosphere nice. But in Seoul, like they go hard. Cafes are like so furiously competitive that you need to always go the extra mile to make sure that people keep coming back to your cafe. They put so much work into like the best aesthetics, like the best produce, the best atmosphere. It like becomes such a part of your life when you live in South Korea that I really don't think Westerners appreciate how important cafe culture is. Yeah, and one important point on the flip side of that is that cafes close down really, really frequently because they just can't keep up. So if you really love a cafe, then go to it a lot because you will find that it's closed. One of the weirdest things about living in South Korea is that people will stare at you for wearing certain clothing, particularly low-cut tops, like this one. So for example, in summer, I really like wearing wrap dresses like this. Like I think they're a really cute silhouette and they work really well on my body type. But they are obviously cut with a V-line here. And Koreans hate that, particularly the older generations, and they will stare. I would get so many looks for wearing these dresses and so many stares, and it just made me feel so uncomfortable. Even if it's like not that obvious like by Western standards, like it will still be like kind of scandalous in Korean society. But then when I would wear a light sweater with exactly the same amount of leg showing, like I'd get like no stares, like nothing to make me feel uncomfortable. It literally is just like any kind of like exposure of the chest, you're gonna get stares. I mean, to be honest, people would still stare because like I'm very blonde and I'm very tall. I'm like an awkward, gangly giraffe in a very homogenous society, but a lot less. Yeah, and so most people are just staring because of said awkwardness, not because they disapprove. So you feel a lot less horrible. So that's something that like I continue to find very weird. Like chest is bad, but legs are fine. So this is something that I really hated when I first got to Seoul. It was super hot, and so this issue became very obvious, and I just like felt like really uncomfortable. Yeah, it's just not a very pleasant experience. And it's just something to be aware of. I mean, if you love people staring at you, then you go girl, like you get it, you wear whatever you want and like you don't care, like all power to you. But for me, I didn't like it. So another super weird thing that you just have to get used to if you're planning on moving to South Korea is that if you have visible tattoos, they will get remarked on all the time. So if you guys didn't know, I actually have 2 visible tattoos and they're both on my hand. I have the Deathly Hallows here, I don't know if you can see. I have the Deathly Hallows here and I have a wolf on this finger. And like they hardly really get remarked on in like the US or like Europe, but in Korea, they would get remarked on all the time. I think it's because they're still pretty taboo, but like I've never got the number of remarks, like even half the number of remarks in London that I have done in Seoul. So for example, when I lived in an apartment which was right by Gangnam Station, so a very cosmopolitan, like kind of touristy area, like people who live there see a lot of different kinds of people, like it's quite a hip neighborhood, which is a very lame way of saying it. But there was this convenience store that I would always go to on the ground level. There were actually 2 convenience stores in my building, and this is very common in Korea. A lot of apartment buildings will have either like a cafe or convenience stores or both on site, which is very convenient for like late night ramen runs. And no joke, every single time I went into the store, the ajushi owner would physically grab my hand in order to tell me off about my tattoos. Like, he wasn't doing it to be mean, it was kind of like a running joke. But like, you can tell that he was only like half joking, like he was pretending to joke about it, but like, I could tell like deep down, like he didn't really like my tattoos. So what he'd do is he would hold up this one and be like, "Yoppo," and then hold up this one and be like, "Oh, which is like, this one's pretty and then this one's not because it's got tattoos on it." But again, he wasn't being mean, it was just kind of like a running joke. And also because he knew I didn't speak a lot of Korean, I think that it was just a way for him to like connect with me and like kind of like a talking point, which I appreciated, and it made me feel like I had somebody to talk to sometimes. On the subways, I've had quite a few people comment about them, like always young people and never mean, like always kind of like, "Wow, that's so cool," or like, "Where did you get it done?" Blah, 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 blah. But like, I've always found that it's just like not something that we really think about in Western cultures. And I feel like in Western cultures, like you don't really comment that much on people's tattoos because the visible tattoos like exist. Like you comment more to like be like, "Wow, that's a really cool design," or like, "What does that mean?" rather than just like the surprise of like there being a tattoo that's visible. People were surprised that they existed rather than like what the story of the tattoo was, kind of a thing. Like, do you see the difference? Like that was kind of weird to me. Also, tattoos in South Korea are definitely like a method of societal defiance, which is really cool, and definitely what it used to be in the West, but it's kind of lost its meaning now because tattoos are so common. So what's quite common in Seoul is to see, well, not super common, but like kind of common, is to see guys with these neck tattoos if they want to like give off that vibe of like bad boy vibe. And it works. I mean, I love a good neck tattoo. I really do. But it's much, much, much less common to see women with visible tattoos. So if you're planning on moving to South Korea, or if you already live in South Korea, you probably already know this, but if you have visible tattoos, prepare for them to be commented on, good and bad. So another thing that's just like weird about life in South Korea is that showers are a part of the sink. Yeah, pretty weird. I just don't get it. I really don't. So basically, in South Korea, if you have a smaller apartment or if you're in an older building, then you won't have separate like sink area and shower area. They will all be the same area. Your shower will essentially just be like your whole bathroom. And to be honest, I still don't really understand why anybody would think that would be a logistically preferable option. But here we are. So I've never personally lived in an apartment where this was the situation, but a lot of my friends have. And I just don't get it. Everything is soaking, nothing is safe. And it kind of just fills me with this anxiety, the idea of like a whole room getting sprayed with water, with no barrier, no containment, like just unfiltered chaos. That's very, very stressful for me. Maybe I'm just thinking too much into this, man, like, but I just think it's weird. I just think it's weird. Another very strange thing about living in Korea is that you'll find that nobody drinks the tap water. So this is weird, mostly just because it highlights how stuck in their ways Koreans can be sometimes. Even though there are numerous studies that show that Seoul has one of the safest tap water situations in the world, Koreans will not drink tap water. They drink either bottled water or heavily, heavily filtrated water. Yeah, I think it's really important that I say here that I understand that the reason I find this weird is because I'm coming from a place of extreme privilege. I grew up in places where it was perfectly fine to drink the water. London, Paris, San Diego, New York, all of these places you can drink the tap water perfectly fine. I've also lived in places where you can't drink the tap water. Beijing, for example, you have to boil the tap water, but that is a privilege to have tap water that you can drink, and that's why I find it weird. I just don't want people to watch this and think that I'm being naive or that I'm like not aware of the fact that tap water isn't readily available everywhere. Like I am aware of that, and I do understand that it's a privilege, the fact that I find it weird that people don't drink the tap water. But obviously I do completely empathize that tap water is not a privilege that everybody has, and I do understand why there would be nervousness in a lot of places around the world around drinking tap water. And this is actually because historically the tap water wasn't safe, and so they just got into the habit of not drinking the tap water. And I know this sounds very stereotypical, and obviously this is not every single Korean, but in general, if Korean society gets into the habit of doing something, it's very difficult to break that habit. But like, for example, even with my boyfriend the other day, we were talking about the water quality, and even when I showed him all of the scientific evidence, like even then, like his automatic response was like, but like sometimes the Korean mindset is that like scientific evidence has equal weight to age-old habits. They have equal weighting. They mean the same. And that's just so typical. Like, Koreans are in so many ways the most forward-thinking people that I have ever met, ever encountered in my entire life. But on the other hand, they are also some of the most stubborn. Yeah, I just want to point out here, a lot of my Korean friends and my boyfriend are well aware of these like opposing, conflicting parts of Korean culture, and it's just a funny thing. Like, I'm not being negative here. And I really think it's like these little eccentricities that make me love the country so much. Another very weird thing of living in Korea is that garbage will suddenly become one of your greatest fears in life. So this is one of the weirdest things I noticed about myself, was that like in the period of like even just like 1 week, garbage suddenly became this terrifying thing that like consumed so much of like my like nightmarish mind. There are just so many rules, and if you get it wrong, you can get in loads of trouble, and as a foreigner, honestly, it's traumatizing. I think a lot of this fear, by the way, comes from my like inherent need to please everyone. I still want to do good. I still want to get an A+, even if it's in trash separation. So you have plastics, and then you have other stuff, and then you have food, and then they all go in separate bags, and then they all go in separate bins. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's incredible for the environment, and I think that all countries should follow suit, but it is very stressful. And there were these ajumas who like sorted out the like sorting of the bins in my building, and when they spoke to me in Korean, I didn't understand them, and then they'd look at me with this withering expression, and I knew I disappointed them and I'd hate myself, and then they'd reach out and they'd grab my graffitied hand and they would know that I am everything that's wrong with this generation. I'm kidding, they didn't really do that. But I still felt like I really disappointed them, and I hate disappointing people, and so garbage really became something that I feared, and it was very stressful. Very weird. Never have I been so stressed about garbage in my entire life. So guys, that's my roundup of weird things about living in South Korea. Both weird things that I found myself doing and also weird things that just happen. But I just want to leave you with one thing, like just remember when you're moving to a different country or you're even just visiting somewhere, half the fun is embracing and starting to love all of the different cultural things, the different eccentricities of each culture. And I encourage you, even if you think that they're weird, embrace it. It's half the fun. Anyway, thank you so much for watching my video. I appreciate you guys more than I can ever say. If you liked this video, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you back here this time next week for my next video. Thank you so much. Bye.